And welcome again to folks on YouTube, on Zoom. Thank you for being with us today to talk about voter engagement, VoteLove, and UU the Vote. So what's UU the Vote? What's VoteLove? So UU the Vote, as Nicole mentioned, was something that came out of UA in 2020. Susan Frederick Ray at GA that year, I think, or the year before maybe, said, how can we harness the power of our faith and values in this critical time of democracy? And so UU the Vote was, I think, the brainchild of Susan Frederick Ray, and Nicole has taken that and run with it and built it into a powerhouse organization, which is recognized by organizations well outside of UU land as a powerful organization. VoteLove is our Illinois branding of UU the Vote. So if you're confused, they're the same thing. It's just VoteLove is UU the Vote Illinois. And if you want to use UU the Vote at your congregation, that's fine. If you want to use VoteLove, that's fine. They're the same thing. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole. I have some ideas, but my main question is, let me get my script here, hang on. Because I really did think this through before. It just left my head. Yeah, I'm going to invite Nicole to share a bit about yourself, how you got into voter engagement work, what should people know about UU the Vote, past, present, and future, and then I'll talk about VoteLove.
Thank you. So thank you, and none of my work has any meaning or is possible without people that come to it. So just truly, truly grateful for folks that said yes to UU the Vote, especially when we, didn't know what was going to happen and how we were going to make it happen. I do not want to stand up here the entire time. I would like us to maybe move in, but just have a general discussion about the work ahead. And maybe also invite you to, similarly, the question that Scott asked, which is kind of like, how did you get involved? While I came on at the UUA as the national organizer for UU the Vote, my job has transitioned. I am the field and programs director, so they tell you that the reward for good work is not supposed to be more work, but it often is. So all of the programs, I work to support building up local to state to national infrastructure, figuring out who do I need to be in relationship, what training, what support needs to happen, whether it is around reproductive justice, gender justice, immigrant justice, all of it. But electoral work will always have a very tender place in my heart. And it is not particularly because I think it is the most effective strategy into creating justice. It is because it is an entry point for so many. It is often the first thing that people get involved in. Whether it is running for class president and voting in middle school, from registering to vote, to consistently voting, moving around, finding out who your congressperson is, maybe one day knocking on doors, joining a phone bank. Folks generally get involved in some type of change work through elections and through democracy. And I believe that where we start our work can be powerful. The first campaign I worked on was actually in Illinois. It was in, the northern suburbs. It was very cold. It was a primary. It was like in not December, but like February. It was terrible. It was very cold. And it was the first time I knocked on a door. I didn't want to. The person that trained me came to 2 doors with me. No one opened the door, and then sent me off. And I did everything. I fundraised, I door knocked, I phone banked, I processed the check, I planned events, all that. And it was election night, not election night, the night before the election, and we were assembling walk packets for pretty much all the volunteers and union workers to go knock on doors the next day. And they were not efficiently done, let's just say that. My math background very helpful in me looking at the geographic cutting of the turf and said, this is not efficient. So I redid the GOTV plan. It took me until about 2 o'clock in the morning, and then had to return to the office at 7 a.m. And we lost. We lost by 600 or so votes. And I'm like, that was a few more volunteers. That was maybe more efficient turf cutting. And I realized how much power one individual can have. And I also knew that one individual is not joining a campaign, cutting turf, knocking on doors, raising money. That's not what normal people do. But we have to figure out in our work of building justice communities of how to make sure folks know that whatever action they're doing, it is part of something larger, and that they too are powerful, and that they are the margin of difference, that we can't do the work without them. It is not a, well, if you feel like it, it is a, this is the work of our time if we want to change what is right now really very difficult circumstances. So that is how I got into this work. It is why I stay in it, because when people say yes to taking action, I want them greeted by the beautiful and sacred imaginations of Unitarian Universalists. So I'm gonna stop talking, and I actually wanna hear about what got you all involved, what you are like dreaming and scheming. The ink is not dry on You the Vote 2024, so I really would love to hear from you all about your experiences, what would be helpful to you, what you're dreaming up here, and how I can support, or just stories of amazing things.
And folks on YouTube, feel free to put stuff in the chat. We will read it into the room. But yeah, this is something of a roundtable, and we'll get to some more resourcing in a bit too. But what are some things that, Nicole, you set it up with. Why don't you set it up one more time, just for me, because I didn't get it.
So what do you hope for and need moving into work in 2024? What has been useful or powerful to you? And I guess what is it about the program or about this work that kind of makes you come alive?
Be sure to talk into the mic, all y'all.
As far as Illinois is concerned, I did the UU Vote postcards that we did here. But for me, a personal experience that I had last year, my daughter was operation manager in North Carolina for a congressional candidate who was going for the seat that Mark Meadow and Madison Cawthorn had, if you can imagine. She was outwardly lesbian, married, 3 children, and that sort of thing. And so I decided, I went down for the primary, and I went down for the general election to help out my daughter on this deal. I ended up knocking on doors. I never, ever thought I would knock on a door, and I thought, oh God, what am I gonna do? But anyway, it was very interesting. Yes, I had a door slammed on me, and that sort of thing. I also had one instance that was wonderful. It was an older gentleman who said, you know, I voted on every election and I'm not going to get there this year because my daughter can't drive me. And I said, you know, let me talk to the office, and we have an ability to do that. I took his name and number again, and I went back and I said, can I pick him up? And they said, sure. I went and picked him up the next day for the election, took him to the polling place. He was absolutely delighted. He couldn't have been happier that he continued his long-term voting situation. And he was a black gentleman, and he was just so happy by this whole thing, and it made me so happy as well. And I've decided that I'm going to volunteer my time for Nikki Brudzinski here in Central Illinois.
And of course, we're nonpartisan here, but Diane, is Diane back in the kitchen? Chad, anything you want to share about what's worked at UUANI, what you're needing for this next year? Do you want to? I put you on the spot, I know, but.
I'd say one thing that we have recognized is there seems to be a lot of discomfort with the thought of canvassing. So if that's the first thing that comes to folks' mind about what this is like, then I worry that they just won't get involved. So I would like to see us publicizing all the different ways that you can do this work that may not involve going door to door.
I missed the first part of that, but I'm guessing it had to do with, yeah, how do we not just scare people out of their skulls, right? And how do we get people beyond just postcards? Because we are really good at postcards, and we need to do more than that.
I should have asked for the mic back. No, I'm glad that you said that. Also, I make a similar face still to this day every time I knock on a door. So when I say I am introverted, and I'm like, oh, okay, it is real. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I often think about how we tell stories of our work, and a lot of times we tell them of like the people who did the most bold, outrageous, and sometimes sacrificial thing, and I'm like, I'm not signing up for that. And door knocking can be a heavy task. I think the biggest thing is about building excited and motivating community. What we did in 2022, and that we are going to do more of in 2024, is actually support our congregations and more of our state action networks in doing more community events. Bringing both their UU community, their local community, their partners together, so that folks can actually understand and meet their neighbors and like know what the needs are in their communities, but also to know what partners are doing, because if you expand the menu of actions, you can expand the people who will say yes to them. Also, peer pressure. It does. There are so many people who said, oh, I'm scared to phone bank, I'm scared to phone bank. And then when you have this, we had this amazing event in Athens. And there was a state rep that spoke, Indivisible was there, New Georgia Project was there, this economic justice organization was there. There was about 150 people there, a local band was playing. It was so much fun. There were youth there. And then when at the height of the event, we say, and now we're going to do the thing that we've been talking about all day and call those voters, and people see their minister, right, and their social justice chair, and maybe their teenager go in and say, I'm gonna do it. They go, okay, I'll try. I'll make one call, and then they don't get up. So I do think that it does start with like building community and affirming the gifts that people are bringing to the work, and creating spaces for folks to, you know, level it up a little bit. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just going to reframe that peer pressure in more grace terms as jumping on the bandwagon, right? I mean, that's serious. I think it's about building that sense of we're a community. We have relationships with each other. We hang together, and we can do this together. And yeah, I'm scared. You're scared too. I mean, that's actually what's the song that Karen's saying, right? I'm scared too, and we're still going to do it anyways. But we got each other, and that's the thing. Do not do this at home. Do not try this by yourself, right? Let's do this together. Yeah, I had another thought going, and it'll come back to me. I'm going to hand it to Diane back in there, because Diane led the VoteLove effort here at Springfield last year, and love to hear how it went and what you need next year.
Yeah, we really had a really positive experience with the VoteLove last year. We teamed up with the Faith Coalition for Common Good, which was local, and we got very specific voter lists to work with, which were voters that were under 30. They had voted in 20, but not in 22. Somehow they had carved out this group, BIPOC, all of these. So we really felt that our effort was going directly to our community, because many of us are doing Vote Forward and doing lots of things outside of church. But our church group, really, it was very exciting because we were right here in Springfield getting to the people we really wanted to get. And we started out with 500 postcards that went through that like that, so we got 300 more. We had over 25 volunteers, and it was just a really positive experience, and I think we'll be ready for more. Cool.
I remember what I was going to say. So you were talking about community events in congregations. Yeah, and there's no reason why every congregation couldn't host a community event. It doesn't have to be huge. Like adopt your neighborhood, or as one of my mentors says, adopt your precinct. That's maybe a few hundred people. Like do you know what the neighbors are? And I know that you got pastors across the street here, so not quite the same, but do you know your neighbors in the vicinity of your congregation? Consider that's part of being grounded in your community, is knowing your neighbors. They don't have to come worship with you, but they should know what you're about, and maybe you got something you can talk to them about. If you start by listening, what do they care about? Again, I always go back to relational organizing is about listening. Have we spent time listening to our neighbors? Because I think listening is a lot easier than knocking on a door and telling people what you want them to do, because that's like you're pushing buttons on my side, I'm pushing buttons on your side. But I've done this. I've gone to congregations across the street from Unity Temple in Oak Park and said, I'm just curious what people are interested in the neighborhood. Tell me what you're talking, what do you care about? And I heard all kinds of stuff, from the school board to the environment to police. I mean, people care about stuff, and they're often stuff that we care about too. They might have a different angle on it, but once you got a common ground, you have a conversation. That is a big ask, and so a community event, another way I'm thinking about community events is every congregation could host a community event, and it's a lot easier to go to your neighbors and invite them to an event than to have a conversation on the doorstep. It's not an either or. You can do both and, but if the conversation on the doorstep said, I'm never doing that, would you consider knocking on somebody's door and saying, hey, I got a little flyer, we're going to talk about what we care about in our community and how we can make a difference, how that plays out in our democratic process, how we're going to frame it. Is that close to what we're talking about? Yeah.
So I'm also involved in the League of Women Voters chapter in our community, and I know that the state is thinking about subscribing, and I don't know what the software is called, but it's the software that all the campaigns use to identify, to identify the people under 30 who aren't registered to vote. And one thought that I've had with our efforts is we've done a lot of postcards and that sort of thing, but I worry that we're preaching to the choir, essentially, right? We're reaching out to folks that already share our things rather than reaching out to people who may not vote, may not be engaged, that sort of thing. So something like that would make it easier to target people that haven't heard those messages before, haven't maybe voted before, haven't registered to vote, and need to learn how to do those things, or have that interest but don't have the ability for whatever reason. So has there ever been any discussions to get that software or to license that or that sort of thing?
And Nicole gets that question all the time, right? I think your advice and my advice is, who is your local community organization that has those lists? Like IPA in Bloomington, I'm pretty sure has access to those lists. Faith Coalition in Springfield has access to that list. I talked to Rum and Rockford, they have so there are community organizations that have those lists. And that's part of doing the work is, again, don't do this on your own. We can't be running up by ourselves all the time. We need to find who in our community is doing this work that we can partner with and add our stubborn ounces of our weight, right? Our 2 cents, or whatever we got, to what they're doing. And I think those local community organizations are where it's at in terms of they have done this stuff the league doesn't do that stuff. I'm really clear, the league doesn't do that. But local community organizations do, and they have those lists. And I think you're right, it isn't about preaching to the choir. It also isn't about talking to the farthest people on the other end of the spectrum. It's like, we don't need to have that conversation. They're not gonna change their mind, they're not gonna change my mind. We're talking about people who are unlikely voters, who are maybe not engaged. That's where the potential is, right? That's where we can make a difference. We really can't make a difference with people who are already 100% on our side or already 100% against us. Like, there is no conversation. We're already talking the same language, we're totally different planets. How do we find the people in the middle? That's where we need our community partners to help us out. Anything you want to add? I'm going to keep on kicking it back to you, you know that.
There's a few things, absolutely. Community partnerships are the way to go. I want to tell the truth about Unitarian Universalists, which is every time I work with a new partner or organization, or even have interviewed people applying for jobs, and they're always like, oh, UUs are most of my, I'm like, oh, what experience do you have in Unitarian Universalism? UUs are all of my volunteers where I work right now. We have the people. And it is because we do the work to be with our people, to train folks, to build capacities, to nourish our spirits. We can't do everything. We're really good at that one thing that actually produces results. You all show up. I will rely on a partner organization for the software. I prefer the people over the software. But the one thing that we also do, which we are going to work to expand, is that we do not have access to the Voter Action Network, nor is that something I believe happening anytime soon. We work with organizations that do, right? So when we do phone banks, that information is coming from the Voter Action Network. We just get it from other people. But we do have the software to do the phone banks, right? To call the people, and that is also an immense added value to the local scrappy organizations. We worked with Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights in Georgia, which is now becoming a larger organization, but a small and scrappy organization. And when they realized, they're like, wait, we can just give you our entire membership list and you'll just have call them in the primary when the date had moved. And we're like, yeah. And they're like, sometimes they are shocked because the reality is that this is not the offering they get from most faith groups. UUs are organized. And when they see that, that's actually what they need. They don't need more people getting more software, getting more like sophisticated and techie with their work. They need people. And that is our greatest resource. One thing that I'm like, I will be remiss if I don't bring up, in 2020, one of our other larger events was called Harvest the Power, and I had told all the state action networks to get their numbers in so that we could figure out where we were, because we had not set a voter contact goal yet. And the numbers were flowing in, and I was like, oh my God, we might like reach 1 million. Like, so what should we set the goal at? Like 1.5 million, like 2 million? And maybe 20 minutes before this event, I get an email from Karen, I believe, with all of your postcards and letters. And I was like, what the hell is going on in Illinois? And y'all were the people that pushed us well over 1 million postcards and letters at that point in the campaign. So I just want you to all be very, very proud of yourselves I was generally frustrated in receiving information after a deadline, but that one I was okay with.
And seriously, Karen built our VoteLove effort. Anything you want to say, Karen, about how you did that? How you got so many people involved? Because you really built the baseline for what we're doing now.
Grace is real, right? The relationships have to be there before you need them in order for that to actually work. And boy, were people just hungry for somebody to be able to talk to, right? So we did a lot of on the ground calling and making sure that things happen. And the numbers, postcards are amazing, but we also did roadside signing, right? Which seems like a silly little thing, but let me tell you, people get nervous standing on standing in Rockton, Illinois, okay, 10 miles south of the Wisconsin border, the very red county with signs that say Black Lives Matter or women's right to health care. It's not unconfrontational for them. For those people who were there, they had people driving by throwing things at them and throwing words at them as well. So being imaginative about what does that look like? What's the next step? And I know that phone banking is so much better than text banking, but text banking is easier and is a step into the phone banking thing. So we did a lot of that too. And just a shout out to something that we took on in that time frame were these value conversations, because we recognized that people were struggling with wanting to know where their values were seen within the world. And I'm not sure that they went over as well as they might have, but it was a way for people in this odd space to be able to gather and say, this is who I am, these are the values that I want to reaffirm, and how it is that I'm moving forward. So can I add something to the conversation? So this is gonna sound odd, but it's come up in my head and heart 4 or 5 times since I've been sitting over there, so I take it as intuition. I am curious with the people that not the usual people in the room, with the people that we're trying to reach out to who are at arm's length. I'm curious about the intersection between grief and hope. And the reason that I bring that up is because I feel like the world went through this cataclysmic event where, 525,600 minutes, that is how many people died, 1 person a minute during 2020, right? And I haven't processed that. I don't know if anybody in this room has processed that. And there's so many other things besides just COVID. And so I wonder if there's a space for grief as a way to be able to access and give people the ability to have hope again, that their votes and that working for the democracy might actually be worth something for them to do. I don't know. Like I said, just something that's coming up into my head, and wonder about that. What's the intersection point between hope and grief?
I have a follow-up question to that question, or a related one maybe. A lot of people who I think are like in that not engaged but could be engaged category are people who are marginalized and perceive that like it doesn't matter who they vote for, it's going to be a bad outcome for them anyway. And so in our congregation, we've started to talk some about voting as harm reduction. But like that's a very, in my opinion, like sort of joyless or grief-based approach to voter engagement. And I guess like my one curiosity is maybe how do you build some joy around the idea of harm reduction? Or alternately, how, like what alternative to harm reduction can we be offering to people who see us electing better alternatives and are still experiencing harm at the hands of those better alternatives?
I wonder, from grief to hope. And I wonder if it involves kind of jumping out of being in the same track that we've been in for 3 years, you know, where we're kind of mentally, you know, I ask people about things, oh, we're still doing it Zoom because of, you know, COVID. I mean, there's just kind of this residual tiredness. We're still doing it that way because that's how we had to deal with it for, you know, years. And I wonder if just getting out of that track and inspiring people, you know, I think of, I don't have a lot of experience in this congregation yet with voter, you know, turnout and such, but in Wisconsin, I was involved, I don't know how I got signed up, but I was a election, you know, some sort of accountability person at the end of the night when they were counting the votes. So the polls closed at, 9 o'clock, so I had to show up at 11, you know, an odd time of day for me. And, you know, I had to drive across the Wisconsin prairie some miles, and you show up at this little township hall, and the lights are all blazing, and there's like 4 cars there, and it's the town clerk and, you know, 3 other election officials, and just walking in there and seeing how this was going on everywhere in the state, you know, kind of at the same time, everywhere in the country, you know, and it makes you think of when you're a little kid and you think on Christmas Eve, ooh, everybody's, you know, excited about Santa Claus at the same time, you know, connecting into this bigger thing. And just the, you know, for me personally, kind of the sacredness of the vote. And, you know, a lot of that got lost in the last 3 years where it was like, you know, who won and who didn't, and, you know, election clerks getting trashed. And then slowly, I mean, there are little stories out there about, you know, these election clerks that persevered, and, you know, the process is still alive. I mean, it didn't get trashed by COVID. I mean, it's still alive, and it's still valid and valuable, and maybe that's how you go from, you know, grief to hope. I don't know, but I mean, it inspires me still.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. How do we connect the relatively bloodless grunt work of electoral politics, not even politics, the democratic process, shall we will, which just isn't that exciting for some of us, right? I mean, some of us are geeks, and it's always exciting, but that we're weird. So how do we talk to real, regular people for whom politics is, and the democratic process just doesn't make a difference, right? And I think it's finding ways to connect the very practical things of sending a postcard or sending a text or making a phone call or talking to somebody or getting people to vote or whatever it is, with the real heart conversations of how do we listen to each other and share our grief together and share what we care about, share our hopes with each other. That's where the work comes alive to me. It's like if it was just about sending postcards and flipping switches, that's not what I signed up for. I signed up for relating to real people who care about the things I care about. Or who maybe have a slightly different angle on it than I do, and I can learn from them. It's a process. It's not a one-way process. How do we do that? It's easier in our congregations, not this easy, but it's easier. It's maybe harder out with our neighbors, but maybe not. It's always there in our families, right? Those are probably some of the hardest conversations we can have, but they're important, and they might go somewhere if we listen, rather than make it a fight that's about, yeah.
So making you get your steps in today. One thing we have focused on in the league, then by the church by extension, is especially reaching out to the younger voters, right? So there's an effort by the League of Women Voters of Illinois to reach out to all the school districts to make sure that the students who turn 18 years old during their senior year know they can register to vote. As long as they're 18 by the time the election happens, they can vote. So there's a campaign to reach out to the school districts. That could be something that could be very easily done across Illinois. Like McLean County, for instance, has something like 10 or 11, 12 school districts, and we're reaching out to all of them. That is something where you're connecting with students right from the get-go, right, and making a connection in a way that they may not have that connection made otherwise. I think that might be an interesting effort for us to do at the state level. There's, congregations across the state. We reach out to all those, share the information, and then we're making sure that the students are doing that. I also work at a university. Many universities have civic engagement service learning units that also appreciate help to reach out to the students to make sure that they also know that as well. So that's another, pitch that I would make, another thing where we really are reaching out to those who do not have that experience, do not have that practice yet.
Any questions or comments from the chat? Lisa? Nothing on the chat.
Okay, how to re-inspire hope in my community, right? I've been working with community leaders for a very long time in regards to getting people out to the vote since I started as a people chair at the local 2481, just teaching people what it meant to vote, why it was important to vote. And while I have people in my circle, they listen to me, they advocate, they understand, and they hear the words, they're passionate at that moment, and they vote, but there was no effective change in their community. And then they vote, they get a bad representative, but there's still no effective change in their community. So they voted twice. Each time they've gotten a representative, neither of those representatives affected any change in their community. Why are you asking people to vote if we are going to be sitting in the same spot after our vote? And as a matter of fact, you put more emphasis on getting us to vote, and as soon as we vote, you disappear. So how do we continue to maintain the structure of support if after I voted, I don't even know who you are anymore? We don't have a connection anymore, and the next time I see you, it's time to vote, but nothing's ever happened in my community.
So earlier, when I said, I'm not sure if this process is the best strategy. I think it is a critical one. I think it's an important one because of what I said around it's where people first start many times. But I agree that if I only see you around Election Day, but I didn't see you blocking the steps to the courthouse so that people couldn't be evicted during a pandemic, if I didn't see you at the rally, asking for a pathway to citizenship, if I don't see you anywhere else where my life matters, I'm probably not gonna listen to you. So that is just real. And so I never want to collapse voting in elections as the end, all of democracy. Democracy exists in many other places, and we need to get better at doing that democracy work of building communities that are taking action together on the things that matter to people and impact people. I also think there is a reality of show up for the people who need to be shown up for. There are, of course, folks who go election season to election season with no change in their lives, generations. And there are folks who also might not be experiencing change but are committed to this strategy. In this work, we find the people who can be with us. We find whatever sliver of common ground that we can find, and we lean into it. Sorry, I've been reading a lot of books about strategy, and I'm like, we exploit it. No, we lean into it. Truly, we lean into it, and it is never perfect. But struggling with people towards possibility is the work. It is just not the only work. And I am very grateful. You know I complain and said the reward for good work should not be more work, but I have never been more grateful that there is other work there for me when truly electoral work depresses the hell out of me sometimes. And that brings me to what you said. I am not sure. I hear what you're saying. I am not sure if I would frame voting and organizing people to vote as harm reduction. And that is mostly because of where that term and practice comes from, which is a lot of organizing of like safe use, around needles, around supporting sex workers, of truly doing things to save people's lives in the face of struggles and oppression. And the United States does not exist in a vacuum, and so I would need it may be harm reduction for some, and it may just be straight up harm for others. I actually think that I reflect on who I have voted for often. I reflect on many people. I've worked on elections in many, many states, and I think about the labor I put in to get folks elected and the things that they do or don't do. And I don't have an answer. I know with anything, it can be voting, it can be any issue. It just has to start with people and somewhere. And if it's, I feel okay when I know the alternative is much worse. And when I know that there is other work I can be doing with folks. If this isn't it, then maybe we're gonna go blockade the courthouse next week, and I'll be with you there. But today I'm at the polls. Tomorrow I will be holding hands with you at the abortion clinic. And the next day after that, we will be at the border. Whatever it is, we have to show up in multiple ways. This is not the only strategy, but I think one of the most powerful things you can do sometimes is actually honor what people are telling you. When they say, nothing has changed, and this is not what I'm going to do, to actually see their pain and their grief and realize that the decision that they're making is logical. And being with them in that moment, because I can promise you, that is not what most, that is not the training that most people are gonna give folks working on candidate elections and for a party. Just convince them, or don't listen, or say, oh, you're not a voter, I'm gonna go to the next person. But treating someone like they matter makes a difference. And the last thing I'll say is, and this is always gonna be a gut check, but you ever notice that sometimes you'll do more for a friend than you'll do for yourself? Sometimes it is about honoring where people are at and their realities, and then saying, I know, and I'm gonna ask you to do this for me. but it's not always what you should say. But I think it is real. I think we've gotten so far from being just human with each other. We want trainings, we want scripts. Just be real. Like, just be real. It is hard for me, you know, sometimes like, oh, Nicole, you the vote. And I'm like, I have complicated relationships with voting and elections, and I also am not going to stop. So that's it.
I'm going to say one more thing before we get to the chat. I'm thinking about what you said, Tritria, that, yeah, people ask for votes and you don't see them until the next election. It's like, that's the worst way to do this kind of work, right? Is only care about the elections. Like, again, flip it on its head. This kind of work isn't about the election. Well, of course it is, but it's really about organizing. And it's about relating to people and listening to people and finding where we have common ground and showing up and doing all that work in between elections. Now, if elections happen to be the time when there's energy and there's a reason to start the conversation, great. But you could start the conversation the day after the election. It's like, it doesn't really matter where you start. Just start somewhere and then find where the next step is. There's a whole different conversation, I know, than the harm reduction. But to me, a lot of organizing is about just finding the starting point, and the only way to find that for me is listening and seeing what's out there. And I'm still convinced that we have physical presences in communities, which gives us an automatic into those communities. It's like, they know we're here. Now, it's not, I want to say it's just they. Our communities know that this community is here. We're part of this community. Well, are we? We need to show up for our community by asking them, what do they care about? I don't know, that's one angle here.
So this is in the chat, and this is from UU Advocacy Network of Illinois, and they write, I have hope of UUs running for office. Can UU the Vote help with this idea?
Oh. Oh, sorry, I like to be precise in my words. Can UU the Vote, would it be possible? It would be possible to maybe design some likely not very effective training program nationally to get folks, you know, engaged in thinking about and training folks to run for office. But the reality is that those pathways exist with like entire organizations with lots and lots of money, way more money than we have. And if folks want to do that, they can be engaged in them, whether it is Run for Something's, Emily's List, Victory Fund, the Democratic Party, the Working Families Party. It's out there, the resources are great. If you're thinking about running for office, truly, like, they will train you up and help you, like, build a campaign for, like, free. One, if we attempted to do it, I don't think we would be very effective at it, just because, like, we do what we can do very well. And those are the choices. I also think about the landscape of who needs to be running for office today. I have a very good friend in Minnesota, and we have done lots of work together. And, you know, she's always thought about running for office, and I think she will. And luckily, she is a person that has the resources to decide where she lives. And as she goes about making that decision, right, she works in politics, so she knows the map. She knows who's retiring, where the seats are going to be empty, what the strategies are going to be. And one thing that she keeps in the back of her mind is, I'm not going to root myself in a district where I know the demographics are changing, and we can elect a person of color in this district in 4 years. So I do believe that people who share our values, Unitarian Universalists or not, right, the folks that share our values need to be in office and need to be writing legislation. I just don't know if it's us every time. So yes, people should run for office, but I don't think that it's more complicated than that. Yes, our values need to exist and move through our government. But what else are we considering? Do we think we are the saviors? Or are we figuring out what our position is? Because maybe it's not an office. Maybe it is an office. Maybe it's talking to that person who should run that's not running. Push them. Build a campaign around them. Start raising money and then knock on their door and say, hey, we have the seed money for this campaign if you say yes. You know, figure out what your lane is and do that. Because unfortunately, we know how many seats in our government work. Once you get them, we got them for a long time. And we have an opportunity. I'm very moved by the amount of young folks and people of color who are running for office. And I think about Cori Bush, I think about AOC, and regardless of however you might feel about their politics, that the entry point was at the primary. And the entry point was people being exhausted with people who have an inheritance of a seat. And I really don't want us to become those people. And I really want us to think about possibilities. The leader that you maybe haven't met yet. And think about these districts and who should be the person that is running. And so, can we? Yes, it would be ineffective. Will we? Not while I'm around.
And yes, Bill, I know Carbondale's been doing this for a couple of years at least.
Well, on this particular question, one thing that we thought about and talked about but didn't actually follow through on doing was thinking about local elections. It was either last March or last April, Illinois had local elections, city councils, school boards, county road commissioners, county sheriffs maybe. Anyway, a number of lesser offices. Carbondale's in Jackson County. The county immediately to our east is Williamson County. The county immediately to our south is Union County. I actually tabulated how many times there was a competitive race. So more than, if there's 3 slots open on the city council, were there more than 3 people running? That was about 1/3 of the races. About 1/3 of the races, if there were 3 seats open, there were 3 people running. And in 1/3 of the races, there were 3 seats open and less than 3 people running. In my mind, that's not exactly the way I'd like to see democracy work. And so one of the things we thought about at a very local level, kind of in our congregation, we could host some kind of forum or series or something, people we respect on the city council, people we respect on school district boards, just sort of what prompted you to run for office? What did you do to prepare? What's your experience been like? And kind of just trying to, first of all, understand their experience, but also get people thinking about, is that something I could do? Because, I'm not quite sure what it's, well, I used to live in Chicago. I have some idea what it's like in Chicago. But, in Carbondale, a city council or a mayoral election, it probably isn't quite the same as trying to fund a seat a campaign for a seat in Congress or something like that. It's a much more doable thing, and these positions may not have the same power in terms of national impact, but they have a great deal of impact in terms of the lived experience of people in our counties and cities and townships and wherever else. So I think, that may be something that some of us congregations here in Illinois can just experiment with. I don't know what the breakdown was in your county. I hope every campaign in McHenry County and McLean County and Sangamon County was competitive. Personally, I doubt it. But kind of that's something that we can think about doing that relates to the question, wherever that question came up from, whoever asked that question. I also wanted to ask Nicole, as you think about UU the Vote in its next cycle, the question that came out of Allison's comment and Karen's comments, kind of how do we frame what we're trying, how do we frame the election, how do we frame the democratic process more generally? Harm reduction is one frame, and I understand what people are saying with that, and I understand that there are people who, that maybe is the most constructive frame they can use. But kind of maybe they haven't seen some other frames that would make sense to them. And I think it's a really important question, and I think it's something that people whose values don't correspond with ours often do very well. They're good at framing issues in ways that make not necessarily good in framing them the way I would agree, but good in framing them in a way that connects with a lot of people, for better or worse. And the final question is a very technical one, or suggestion, very technical. It was, I forget which UU the Vote year it was, but there was this thing, kind of an email from UU the Vote to all the congregations or whatever. Tell us what you're doing, kind of let us know your results and stuff. I'm very embarrassed that, frankly, it was actually impossible for us to put our results in because there wasn't a kind of what else have you done that doesn't fit our categories question. And sort of talking to people about election information and where their polling places was and stuff like that. I mean, if we registered 45 people, we could put that in, but we talked to another 450 people, just kind of helping them think about where to do early voting, how to get registered, how to request an absentee ballot, all this, all kinds of pieces. So, maybe you could have other stuff you've done. I know it would be hard to put it all together in terms of the numbers. But you could say, there's 900,000 other things people have done. Thanks.
Okay. It was the uncontested elections. Very true. And I want to be clear in how I think about things from where I sit. And I think about, scale, which is nationally, that is not something we can do because of the amount of consideration that needs to happen. The more local, the more consideration is possible to actually know if that is the right step. And there are some political organizations who have been very good at making sure nothing is uncontested until it is taken over. And then it can go uncontested. So that is real. I will also note if you want to run for office, you will need to get very good at both making phone calls and knocking on doors and convincing others to as well. So maybe, maybe that is a start. Then I'll go to the last one, and then you'll have to remind me of what was in the middle. Lord have mercy. That form, it's being revised.
It's not easy to think about what anybody might say to the form you put together.
Yes. And once it is revised, it will also be imperfect. But it will be better. And yes, we cannot gather all of the information. It is, we do the best we can. There was a middle framing, Lord have mercy. That could be the frame. I keep thinking about Miriam Kaba, the writer, librarian, abolitionist, organizer. who talks about how everything worthwhile is done with people. Miriam Kaba. I don't have a message. I don't have a messaging doc for you. Maybe I will in a few weeks. But I do think for 2024, we do really need to think about building communities that are for and about people. We talk about, this country for the people, by the people, and the reality is most people do not have that experience anywhere in their lives. Not at the polls, I'm finishing up. Not at the polls, not in their workplace, not in their homes. When we talk about oppression, I know a lot of times we talk about gender justice and racial justice, but we live in a very oppressive society, and that oppression lives in people's houses, in our homes, in our relationships to our friends, and how we treat workers and laborers and how they are treated in their jobs. Most people go through their lives suffering under some type of power. And it is rare that they actually get to experience being a part of a community and knowing that their story matters, knowing that their voice matters, and knowing that when they lift their voice, change happens. And I think, and the reason why I want you, the vote, to become more grounded and that there's more community events and we're bringing more people together is that if we do not allow people to taste small d democracy, big D democracy will end. And it won't have to take voter suppression to get there. It won't even have to take a stolen election to get there. It will happen because people will finally believe that they truly do not have a voice or a say or power in their lives. And we can cultivate that in small ways from where we sit. So all of that into something that we can stamp on a social media post.
So just going to wrap it up. Thank you for this conversation. If you'd like to continue the conversations, that's one of the things that we'd like to do with our Action Council meetings, which are roughly quarterly. You can use this QR code, bring your photo app on your phone, and just the link will show up. You can sign up for either Action Council meetings or the VoteLove team, or the VoteLove work, I guess it might be called. We'll be hopefully continuing some of these conversations. We're also going to do the very nitty-gritty work of we'll connect you with the postcarding people if that's what you need, or that we can help talk. Let's talk about text banking or phone banking or talking door to door or setting up community events, all that kind of practical, logistical stuff. And then there is that whole range of how contested districts are. The more local you get, the more contested, the more potential there is to make a difference. But if you're feeling like you're in a place where you just don't, it's all blue or it's all red, well, we can help. We can help Wisconsin. We can help even Kentucky, right? This year's got contested elections. So those are some different ways that we're trying to make a difference at the statewide level. And so sign up if any of that interests you. And thank you, Nicole. Thank you, everyone who shared. And we'll wrap up in a couple minutes.